understanding now, a reasonably good understanding of why it is that people believe in supernatural concepts. We have a good understanding of what supernatural concepts are. We have a good understanding of what their relationship is to regular, ordinary concept, and how this maps onto what's called ontological categories that were given to us. So we've made a lot of progress in the last 2 or 3 decades, since the 1990s. Not well known to the general public, but I'm starting to try to change that by teaching courses and on this. So, more questions, I love this. The gentleman...
we all have beliefs.
We all
have beliefs.
We all have beliefs, yes.
In nature, we believe things.
Of course.
So the difference is our criterion for determining the validity.
Absolutely.
There's a difference. Some people have different criteria.
Exactly.
Now, what was it you said has changed since 1990?
Oh, so if you take the field of cognitive science, right, basically the sciences of the mind, of intelligence, intelligence in humans, in animals, in machines, the field of cognitive science emerged in the 1970s as a confluence of different fields: computer science, linguistics, psychology, neuroscience. Now, since the 1990s, there's been a subfield that emerged in cognitive science called the cognitive science of religion. It's a number of people in different fields, in anthropology, in neuroscience, in psychology, who started to ask themselves questions about the nature of religious thought and behavior. And that has led to some remarkable discoveries. If you're interested, the best book to read about this is a book called Religion Explained, by a friend of mine called Pascal Boyer, B-O-Y-E-R. It's a phenomenal book that goes over a lot of these ideas. Religion, an ambitious title, then it's Consciousness Explained. I'd love to write a book like that. The World Explained. Descartes, sorry, Religion Explained.
The title of the book.
Right, that's the title of the book, yeah. And the guy is Pascal, Pascal without an E at the end, Boyer, B-O-Y-E-R. That's probably the best book on the book. There are a few other books I'm happy to mention to you if you'd like. So, if you're writing this down. So another book, that's a couple other books I really like. Scott Atran, who's a researcher in France, has a book called In God We Trust. Yeah, it's not as easy to read because he's not, I mean, he's a wonderful researcher, right? But he doesn't write as, well, I might criticize people, but not criticism. So that's a good book. But another one is by Justin Barrett. It's called Why Would Anyone Believe in God? That's a really good book. And I have all kinds of articles, if you're interested, that are more succinct, that summarize the, in non-technical terms, that summarize that field that emerged. So if you shoot me an email through my website, just look me up online. I have a big website. Use a contact form. I'll give you a card. I'm very happy to share those things. It's really fascinating because we've learned so much. Sorry, you guys. Yes, the lady in the front.
This is part observation, but also kind of question.
Yes.
I hear people all the time, friends of mine who are some very smart, but they still have this concept of what a soul. I can't think of any exception in any TV show, movie, book, where the person who dies and their soul goes on and lives another life, they all are at a state of growth and consciousness, like at least teenage, adult. There's never anybody who dies in a state of like being toddler or with dementia.
In those movies, you mean?
Yeah, I can't think of an example, but that just leads to my question.
Yes.
Have you ever heard of a discussion or description of anybody talking about their concept of what this soul would actually be? Like, is it a snapshot of before they got dementia, like a backup and recover in the computer? Is it the projected life that grown-up they would be? They wouldn't have to be a toddler being taken care of forever in heaven. It's like, has this ever come up as a reason for someone to question that notion of a soul?
You ask a very interesting question. So it's a bit like, so there's a lot of variation in this. People have different thoughts. What I gave you as a definition is what brings together a lot of these ideas. When you ask people, you have to ask people precise questions, of course, right? I don't think that the questions that you raise, which are very interesting, have been asked of people. I mean, so I've asked them in my own research lots of questions like, when did you think you got your soul? Why do you think it is? What is it that you couldn't do if you didn't have a soul, et cetera, et cetera. But I never asked them about, like, you know, if you were demented, then what do you think soul would do? Or if you were a toddler, then do you think... The answer is, it's an empirical question, we can find out, but I don't think that this has been looked into. This is very, that's very interesting. It'd be nice to find out. Yes?
There is a movie, it was a movie.
Oh, about a boy, a young boy, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, of course.
And it was called The Littlest Angel, and he was about 6 years old. Can you imagine the Pilgrim children thinking that a 6-year-old boy would be the littlest angel, but that was there, and he was supposed to do something, and I forget what he was supposed to do.
But there's a recent movie based on one of those books,
Heaven is real.
yes, Heaven is Real, or Heaven is for Real. Yes, right. Based on a boy who, you know, whose soul went and came back. Yes.
And of course, anything like that, with that concept of heaven and good and all that, has to be mid-Victorian or later. It wasn't what the medieval people would have thought heaven was.
Well, the notion of heaven has changed and is highly variable.
Very, very definite. But meaning one's family.
Yeah. But so if you listen to preachers today, like say one of my favorites, I'm saying this sarcastically, because he was on national television with his cheesy smile and fake white teeth saying, yeah, I believe that the Bible says that homosexuality is a sin, and he went on like that. So that infuriates me. I don't think he might be gay himself, by the way, which is, there's nothing wrong with that, but come on, give us a break. Joel Osteen is his name, right? But so people talk about heaven. There's belief that there are shopping malls in heaven. I'm not kidding. People are like, and if you're going to play golf, and I want to go there.
That poor little girl, the 9-year-old who died the same time that Gabby Gifford was shot. At her funeral service, someone said, I don't know if there are any rain puddles in heaven, but if there are, I hope she's jumping into them. Honestly, that's on tape.
I know, when it was not the Columbine, but the Newtown shooting, remember 2012? Eben Alexander, the neurosurgeon who claimed that he went to heaven, was on all the TV shows, and mostly on Fox News. Surprise, surprise. And he was asked, well, where do you think these poor dead children are? And he said, oh, they're in heaven for sure, and they're very happy now, and blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, it's a very persistent and prevalent set of ideas. And in a sense, we scientists are the odd ones out because we happen to not believe it. And most people actually do. The lady in, yes, next to
is the Dilbert person in your book? And the other question, is it?
Well, I wanted to put it there, but there are copyright issues. So I describe it in the book, in words, but it's not there in the book. But you can find us online very easily.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And then the second question was, the authors you've been mentioning, are they in your bibliography or?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, the book has all the references. And please, send me an email if you'd like something. So there's a paper I was gonna, somebody asked me about something, I can't remember now, but there's a wonderful paper I could send. So I love taking stuff from the ivory tower that's not very well known to people outside and sharing this. This is fantastic. There's a wealth of things that we have available at our disposal on all kinds of ideas that people are very curious about. Shoot me an email. I'm very happy to send you books to read, ideas. That's what I do for a living. I love it. I read tons of books. I read tons of articles. I think about, I have a privileged life. I'm paid to think about stuff like that. And it's wonderful. Yes,
I promise you this is the last question.
You don't have to promise me.
Thank you for the patience you're having. Listen, how do you explain, because this is something that bugs me.
Yes.
So many people, far more intelligent the chances are than most of us in this room.
Not me, of course, but go ahead. Just kidding. Just kidding.
Present companies excluded.
No, I'm just joking. I'm joking.
So seriously, who believe in God, who believe in a heaven, who believe in many things associated with religion. How could such minds be deep in philosophy, deep in science, and yet with them, they can live with themselves comfortably,
Yes.
even discuss, maybe not too willing to argue, but manage these two, the ends of a polar system.
Right. So 2 parts to the answer. The first part is that the description of the empirical facts is not quite like that. It turns out if you look at the, no, but let me explain what I mean by that. If you take a look at the general population, right, so pretty much everybody, those beliefs are very high. You know, 80–90% of the people in the US believe in God, etc., etc. If you look what scientists believe, it's much, much less than that, right? So if you have a very liberal definition of a scientist, meaning a Nobel Prize winner all the way down to, and there's nothing wrong against people who teach high school, they're wonderful, but they're not quite doing research and stuff like that, right? So if you have an all-encompassing notion of science, then belief in God drops about 40%. Just a huge drop. Now if you take elite scientists, like really good scientists, it drops to about 7 or 8%. So, no, but what this means is that most scientists do not believe in that.
Statistically, that is
Yeah.
How
Now,
can an individual?
but okay, all right. Now, well, they are individuals who actually, in fact, a friend of mine is Mark Baker, does that. There are a number of ways to account for this. If you're interested, there's a very good book, a good series of books, but there's a very good book by somebody called Michael Shermer.
Yes.
You've heard of Michael Shermer, right? Called 2 books I want to mention to you. One is one of his early books called Why People Believe Weird Things, right?
Yes.
And then there's a more recent book called The Believing Brain. Very, very good. And then I think he has a book called Why Smart People Believe Weird Things. The difference between what makes smart people interesting is that once they have a belief, they're very good at justifying and defending it. Right? Better, in fact, than most people. So it's tricky. But there is a relationship between what's called intuitive and analytical thinking in terms of belief in God. So to give you an example, there are psychological studies where we give people problems, logical problems to solve, where there's a right answer and a wrong answer. The right answer is very intuitively appealing. It's small problems like a ball and a bat together cost like $1.10. The ball costs $1. How much is the bat? Something like that, right? Okay. Immediately we're like, oh, I know it's 10 cents, but when you think it through, it's not 10 cents. Okay. So intuition versus step-by-step reason. You give that to people, it turns out it predicts very well belief in God. It turns out that an analytical thinking style is kryptonite, if you will, for belief in God. So in the course that I teach, and you know what, by the way, and this is serious, if I'm assuming you're retired, yes?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Almost.
Almost, okay. If you ever want to swing by Rutgers and take it, that'd be wonderful. But I talk about all this stuff. So we don't have all the answers, but we have some very interesting answers to those questions. Yeah. Thank you.
Very much.
My pleasure. The lady with a scarf.
I think that
And the nice glasses.
when someone is born,
Yes.
we are fully understanding that they seek comfort. Little children have their blankies, I have an imaginary friend.
Me too.
We don't expect that they hold that as they grow, and yet I see this simply as comfort. People believe these things because it's comfortable for them.
Yes.
They want to feel that they don't lose a lost one,
Yes.
that they will be reunited.
Yes.
And it's really quite harmless unless, as you say, they're the ones who are buying billboards, and they're the ones who are using it, sometimes politically or to gain access to people's wallets. But it's really something that would just never go out, is the way I see it.
Mm-hmm. Very good point, very good. I'm going to say 2 things about this. One is sort of a response or a quote from one of my, if not my intellectual hero, Noam Chomsky. I'm sure you've heard about him. Yes. What a remarkable man.
Until he got into politics. Sorry.
Especially when you get into politics, I think. Much more remarkable, a remarkable mind in general. But he was asked by Lawrence Krauss, in fact, recently when they were talking together at the Origin Institute back in Arizona. And as you know, Krauss is not a very big friend of religion. He's an open atheist. And he asked Noam, he said, well, you know, what should we do when the role of educators and scientists is to try to to teach critical thinking and tell sense from nonsense and religion? What do you think about religion? And here's what Noam's answer was. He says, look, if you have large groups of people, including students, who believe that the Earth is 6,000 years old, then you try to correct that. Okay, you try to tell them that that's not the case. On the other hand, if you have large groups of people who believe that the Earth is 6,000 years old, you try to correct that. You try to educate them. You try to say, look, this is not true, and here's why. On the other hand, he said, if there's a woman who just lost a child, and she's not very educated, and she sincerely believes that his soul went to heaven and that she will be reunited with him, he said, then I'm not going to read her a lesson in epistemology.
Right.
And I think that's the right approach. So yes, for some people it can be tremendously helpful, and I admire that. I've lost loved ones. I lost a brother about 20 years ago. Do not believe that he has a soul, did not believe at the time. But if I had, and if it had helped me, I would have taken it. So I don't want to take that away from people. My approach is not to say, look, you believe in the soul, ha ha, how silly this is, stop. My approach is, okay, I'm a scientist, we work on things, we think we have interesting ideas and answers that I'd like to share. There's a marketplace of ideas, I put the ideas out there, then it's up to people to make up their minds. If they think the ideas are more compelling, then they embrace them. If they think they're less compelling, then they embrace them. But your point is very... Now, as to the origins of religious thought, you're right that the notion of comfort plays a role. There are studies that show that. But it's really not... it's a tiny part of the story as to why we have these beliefs and thoughts in the first place. Okay? And I cannot recommend more warmly Religion Explained by my friend Pascal Boyer, who goes over in the introductory chapters these ideas that, well, we have religion because it brings comfort, or we have religion because before we had science we had to explain stuff, or we have religion because of some general tendency. We can do much better now in explaining why we have religious thoughts. We can have much more precise hypotheses that can be tested in the lab, and we've learned a lot. But what you say is absolutely correct, nonetheless. That's one element of religious thought. I'm biased towards ladies, I'm sorry. It's the non-sexist part of me, I guess. And so I'm going to ask the lady with another scarf and nice glasses too, they're slightly shaded. And then I'll ask our wonderful host, so yes.
Okay, great. Really, to your point, as much as I have so much compassion for someone who believes they are speaking to, you know.
Right, sure.
Exactly. I have a
course.
friend who believes that she's speaking to her deceased child through a medium. But the problem that I have is that she spends a fortune on the phone with this woman who she calls up and she holds up a picture of her son and they have this whole conversation.
Yeah.
And it's this whole issue of these people that kind of prey on that vulnerability.
Of course.
And
Yeah.
while I would never talk her out of it, it just irks me something. You know.
I talked to someone recently, a friend, I don't remember, this was maybe with you, Margaret, who had the same issue with his mom and had a chat with her. And supposedly it worked, but it's a tricky issue. So there are sort of two ways to think about this. One way is that the people who peddle these ideas are sincere. They might really believe that they have those powers. In which case you wonder why they charge so much money. Well, you might say they have to make a living, right? So I'd be more generously inclined to people like that if they felt they were sincere. But I know for a fact that there are others who know full well that this stuff is nonsense. And they say, hey, you know what? There are gullible people out there. We're going to prey on them because they're emotionally fragile. And we're going to charge them an arm and a leg to tell them stuff about their dead sons and daughters. That's really, I think, criminal.
Terrible, yeah.
And it's deeply immoral. It's the same thing as, say, politicians. Politicians, for example, on the right will tell you, global warming, what's a hoax from China, stuff like that. there might be some who are sincere. If they are sincere, they are deeply ignorant, we don't want them in office. On the other hand, if they're not sincere, and they're saying this for political expediency, because they're funded by the coal industry, what have you, then I think that there's, on moral grounds, given the amplitude of the problem, one could make the case that they should be criminally prosecuted. Either way, it doesn't look good. It's a moral issue. Likewise for the bill that went down in flames recently. The idea that something like 20-something million people would lose coverage in the next 10 years, I mean, is just, I mean, how can you have a conscience and do something like that?
And say it's better.
And say it's better. When you've been around people who are sick, when you've been around people who die, it is just absolutely beyond words.
But they're not. They're in such, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
A lot of those people are living in worlds where they have absolutely no clue how most people live. They have seen people who are sick, but they've got the best medical care in the world. They see people who die, but it's after consideration. You know, the Congress people themselves have a phenomenal health care system.
They do. They do. Yeah.
So they don't have a clue. And when they say 20 million people are going to be off, I really think that some of these people think that that's a good thing because it'll reduce the debt, and nobody really has a problem in this country getting good medical care if the government doesn't pay for it.
That is a great solution. Then the poor die, so then you know, no,
but that's, you know, I think they're totally clueless.
I think they're evil.
Okay, so
I have to assert myself, I'll never get a chance.
please.
So firstly, when you mentioned the Lawrence Krauss, Noam Chomsky talk at the Origins Project, it's amazing. If you get a chance, it's on YouTube. It's a few hours long. It's one of the best discussions I've seen on YouTube. Number two, when you were talking about critical thinking, I was reminded of Louis Misbud here, who in October is doing a talk about that very subject.
The gentleman, okay.
Right here, so that reminded me of that.
Nice.
It's titled Critical Thinking and Logical Reasoning.
You going to talk here about this?
Yeah, and I'll be covering fallacies and things like that.
So
Nice.
it's like the intersection with some of the things you're saying earlier.
Sounds great.
I teach at Temple University in
Oh, you teach a course on that?
yeah, I was physics professor.
And then on to my
Very nice.
question, and I don't know if it was covered because I stepped out of the room a couple of times, but if you're a dualist, if you believe the mind and the body are separate things, then how do you repair somebody that's ill in their head because it's outside? I know a lot of people that are religious and they're
It's very tricky.
and they say they're dualists. They believe that their soul goes to heaven. Well, how do you repair something that's outside of the body?
You pray, or I don't know. No, I'm joking. But yeah, obviously, or even look. What amazes me about dualists is I wonder if they've ever gone to the dentist. And they said to the dentist, don't bother giving me a shot because my consciousness really emerges from something non-physical. So you chemicals are going to have no effect on my pain. So forget about it. No, they take the shot. Okay.
They get brain surgery to get them to think straight again.
So there's something interesting here. There's another great line of research and thinking in academic circles, and it's something called the illusion of explanatory depth. You all right there? Yes. Okay. What we've realized as cognitive scientists, when you start to plumb the depth of people's beliefs and belief systems, a lot of us have deeply incoherent and incompatible set of beliefs floating around. And in fact, speaking of biases and illusions, most of us, including me for sure, believe that we understand things at a much deeper level than we actually do. So the experiments go something like that. You ask people, do you think you know how a fridge works? Of course. A helicopter, of course. This, of course. Then you say, okay, good. You rate their confidence initially. Then you say, okay, give us a detailed description of how it works. Well, you open the door and it's cold, and okay, great. Well, how about the helicopter? Well, this is the propeller, and they don't, right? It's called the illusion of explanatory depth. And I started going that chain of thought because of the question you asked about, I know there's a good reason why I went there. I was going to make a brilliant point to combine things, but I'm forgetting because I'm getting old.
Fixing the brain.
Oh yes, fixing the brain, right, yeah. Right, so, right, thank you very much. So, in people's minds very often, their whole beliefs are just completely contradictory and incoherent. So, you can be a dualist, but then you don't realize. It's a bit like the person who said, yeah, repeal Obamacare, and they realize, oh shit, I'm covered by the ACA. So, you have scientific ideas, and the view is not coherent. There are a lot of contradictions within it, but it doesn't seem to bother people. Because I suppose that most people are not paid to think deeply about that. It's not a disparaging people. They do other things in their lives. They're not paid to introspect and say, gee, are my beliefs coherent? Let's read 5 books on this, and let's read the philosophers and psychologists, and they have jobs and families, they don't think about it. Yes?
Well, Socrates spent his time pointing out people's incoherent thinking to them until they executed it.
I'm sorry, say again?
Socrates went around pointing out people's incoherent thought to him, and so they executed him.
Yes.
Did you hear that?
Yeah, well,
Look, I tell people whatever works. Bottom line, what works, we need to identify something, even though it's crazy, human beings need to identify with them. Now, I want to quickly share a
identify with those people.
miracle in my own life. I talked to my mother who was dead. I got complete with my mother about my life for 40-some years. Did she love me? Did she love me? Didn't she love me? And I did a little gestalt thing. And I completely spoke to her, spoke back to me, and it was the most wonderful experience.
By spoke to her, you mean you ran a simulation in your mind?
Well, you imagine my mother. I mean, I can see my mother's face. Can't you see somebody? You know, just because one of my mentors, brilliant, still one of my mentors, 30-some years ago, said this: just because you can't see them doesn't mean they're not there. And that to me is simply brilliant.
So if by that you mean that the gentleman with the blue shirt.
Okay, I think you're definitely not
You think I'm not a
salesman?
Gotcha.
The one area that we haven't really covered here is the negative area of fear. I think fear encompasses a lot of these belief systems. That people that believe in a belief thing, they actually are frightened of what their life will be when they reach the end of it. And all of these discussions are headed in that direction. Now, that's one thing. Now, the not invented here aspect of it dictates when I say you're not a snake oil salesman. And that's the fact that you are very soft in your approach to people that do believe in these things. Just as this gentleman said there about the two different dichotomy of our thinking process. And all of this puts us in the frame of mind that if we really want to communicate with each other, we must understand who we're speaking to. And if we do, then we grasp their thought process. And only then can we progress. Otherwise, we're just stymied with this. I'm going to hit you and you're going to hit me back. This is what we're doing politically, religiously, sociologically, everything I see in my life.
You make a very good point. You're right. If we want to, I'll get to you in just one quick second. If we want to engage, you're right that screaming you're wrong or you're an idiot is not going to work. You have to do that. You have to try to understand and try to find common ground if it's possible. It's tricky. So it's been a criticism that's been leveled at some of the more prominent so-called new atheists, saying, well, you guys are just too abrasive and everything. Well, so my take on this is that there might be good reasons, strategically, at least initially, for being that way, because it calls attention to something in a way that nothing else does. Okay? So, okay, be abrasive and good, and it calls attention. David Silverman, I'm sure you all heard of him, he's a pretty aggressive guy when he talks about this. He's a nice guy, in fact. But he gave a talk recently that I went to in he had evidence, which is good data, showing that this approach actually works. Now, I think where I disagree with him is here. He said, well, you see, here's some data that shows that it works, therefore you should all do it my way. The trick is that we're not all the president of the atheist society.
Right.
And so some of us are parents or grandparents or teachers, and what works for him in his role qua president of the atheist society? I'm sorry?
He made the distinction that you made.
Oh, good, I'm glad he did, because when I listened to him, he didn't. And he said we should not call ourselves humanists, but atheists, well. Oh, okay.
He did make the distinction.
Then I convince him, that's good.
If your job that's not practical.
If your job depends on it, it'd be silly to say, well, you know.
Create a dialogue.
Except when you, of course, now it's complicated because they're exactly, right? If you're forced to be a hypocrite, then yes. If there's no pressure on you whatsoever, you're not forced to do anything, and you simply want to express your views, you got to think about the environment in which you find yourself. It may be counterproductive to do that. Of course, if you're pushed and pressed, then I think it's noble and admirable to actually stand your ground and say, I'm not going to have it. In fact, we owe much of the wonderful freedoms that we have to people who did just that, men and women, so that's admirable. So I think one has to take a nuanced approach to these questions. Your strategy is highly contingent on your goals, who you are, your environment. One size fits all is probably not the right approach. But in terms of the new atheists, yeah, they certainly galvanize a lot of attention.
It's the vanguard.
Yeah, I mean, vanguard, I mean, they're new atheists, but here's what's interesting, they're all wonderful people, intellectually, right? But if you read what they write, you're like, oh wow, some people are discovering this. Well, you go back to, say, Bertrand Russell, it was all there, okay? You read Science and Religion, it was, so maybe he was an old atheist, I don't know. But it's, ideas have a way of re-emerging after, and people forget, oh wow. In fact, if you read stuff about the Enlightenment, you'll find that Thomas Paine, for example, Age of Reason, you read that and like, wow, so there's a lot of, that's one thing that amazed me when I researched for the book, is that you read part of what Darwin would say, or part of the materialist of the 18th century, like, wow, those guys centuries ago were like saying things that we're saying now already. It's really impressive. Yes?
Yeah, that kind of brings you back to something that you said in the beginning in terms of the abortion issue.
Yes.
And it's incredibly frustrating to me too that is such it's a divisive issue that I think leads otherwise maybe, you know, people who we might have more in common with to vote for the Republican.
Vote on values.
And I just wondered if possibly it would be a better strategy to come up with like, I don't think that being anti-abortion is, it's not necessary. I mean, it doesn't, belief in the soul does not mean that you have to be anti-abortion because, yeah, I mean.
Although I have to say the arguments that the theologically sophisticated people make are very interesting. I'll run one by you real quick.
Okay.
It's as clever as it is maddening. Here's the argument. The guy I had in mind is a theologian trained at Harvard and Yale, so all the right credentials. Okay. Only, you know, the thought process is just outrageous. But here's what he said. He says, look, the church has never been able to decide whether ensoulment, so the moment in which the soul has to body, is immediate or delayed. Immediate means moment of conception, delayed means sometime thereafter. Okay. And he says, but it doesn't matter, he says. But you can imagine someone saying, well, gee, if it's delayed, then I have a window of time to have an abortion. The thing doesn't have a soul yet. But he's like, Think about it this way, he says. If, suppose that abortion is, suppose that ensoulment is immediate, right? Moment of conception, boom, the soul gets there. Well, if you abort, and it's murder, it's terrible. You have a soul, you have a human being. Okay, terrible. Then he says, suppose it's delayed. Then actually, if you abort something, and ensoulment is delayed, it's actually worse than murder, he says, because you're preventing this tiny packet of cells from ever reuniting with the soul, and therefore reuniting with God, worse than murder. Either way, It's heads I win, tails you lose. Brilliant. So the logic of the soul then checkmates, in that view, any position you're going to have an abortion. You can't have an abortion regardless of whether the church can decide how many angels dance on the head of the pin. That's
But you
clever.
could also, I mean, I've also heard the argument that abortion is fine because that soul is just going to reincarnate in another body.
Well, if you happen to be, say, a Hindu or something, but if you're a Christian and don't believe
Well,
in
I mean,
reincarnation,
even if you're a Christian, that soul
Will
is
go to
going
heaven.
back to God.
depends.
Right?
So that's the thing. It depends on how many angels you think can dance on the head of the pin. That's the problem. And you do not want in the 21st century to have answers to such important questions be based on, that might be God calling. It's 20 angels.
There's a book in Red Book called Denying to the Grave. And it deals more with false beliefs and medical issues, okay, anti-vaccine, etc.
Right.
But the point that it makes that was really interesting to me is that presenting someone with an entrenched belief system with facts, okay, even when presented unemotionally,
Has the
just,
opposite result.
these are documented and anybody can reproduce the facts. Will not change that person's mind, but will actually,
They'll dig in their heels. Yeah.
right. And that, to me, is just so
Frustrating.
the book does make suggestions for public health and different ways of approaching this issue. But I think it's, very true what they said, but I also think it's extremely disheartening.
So this goes back to something we discussed earlier. I think that what we need to do is try our best to actually understand how the mindsets function, instead of standing there and screaming. And then once we have as good an understanding as we can adjust our strategies accordingly. If it turns out that to reach a particular goal, we need not stand up and scream, this is irrational, I think, but there's a roundabout way to do it, then by all means, let's exploit it. So understanding, so all the stuff that you mentioned, all these studies are very important, because they tell us how beliefs are formed, how the mind works and everything. So if we want to find a way to short circuit that, then that's going to be one approach. The other thing too is, so you can target people, so be a public scientist, give public talks, write popular books, do what Margaret has been doing for decades. That's very, very useful. Because there's an asymmetry in the marketplace, in the following sense. The way I put this is that the public relations apparatus for bullshit, to use a technical term, is well-oiled, no pun intended, well-funded, and you see it. I mean, think about it. Think about it. Today, it's just, as Noam Chomsky would say, it's off the spectrum of elementary sanity. You have someone who can tweet something, okay, like, oh, the guy wiretapped me, and there we go. We have days and days without a shred of evidence. That's really frightening. And now I've lost my train of thought again because I thought about Trump.
About finding mechanisms.
Yeah, finding mechanisms and yeah, so being out, right, the asymmetry in the marketplace, right? So we have well-funded institutes, the Discovery Institute and other things that are trying to say attack science. And if you look at, say, the Wedge document, it's very clear, you've seen that. And they're well-funded, and they go in, they're on school boards and everything. To my knowledge, there's no comparable, unified, well-funded force that is going to counter that. That's something else that needs to happen. I think where that force could come from is my world, academia.
Yeah.
Okay? But we're not paid or trained to think that way. My colleague, and I'm going to be harsh to my colleagues, but I think on purpose. My colleagues are very good at being cynical. Say, oh, look at Trump, look at the world, but I'm going to go back to my lab and not do anything about it. I complain about it. The chair of my department, not too long ago, after Trump was elected, we had our first faculty meeting, okay, with business to discuss hirings, state of this and that. He started the faculty meeting by saying, well, I know I shouldn't be saying this publicly, but I'm scared, and he was alluding, of course, to what happened with Trump, and I think we should observe a minute of silence. Okay, so all right, so it's like, okay, oh, wow. There's silence now, look what I felt. Okay, so maybe he felt good about this, and maybe he was sincere, but this is utterly useless. Okay? You want to do something about it, and what you do is you try to devise policies to actually do something. Sounding all self-righteous because you've observed in the silence is not good. And again, there's tons of things we could do. Because we have the knowledge, because we're privileged and we're trained to do that. We have, not every single academic can do this. It takes particular personalities to do this. And if you're on the autism spectrum, it's hard to be in front of a camera. But there are plenty of people who have the inclination and the talent to do this, but they're not rewarded. We're rewarded to crank out study after study, even if it's meaningless.
Yeah.
Because what deans count is number of papers. Oh, you've got 5 papers, great. You haven't made science advance anything, but you've got 5 papers. And get money. They need money. So get federal grants and everything, which are becoming harder and harder to get. But if you don't do that, then people say, well, you're a useless scientist. There's no... One thing I'm trying to do very slowly, and I'm hoping to enlarge, I know this is something we'll talk about, is to try to change that culture and get a number of prominent thinkers signing a petition that says, look, we need to reward scientists at every level who engage in those kinds of activities. It's crucial. If we want to balance to restore the symmetry between BS and good stuff, then we have to have a unified front, a unified force that sends out serious stuff. It's imperative. It's really amazing. You look at how science is. Well, here's an experiment. Go into a bookstore. Okay, look at the science section. You'll have like 2 rows, like 10 books. Now look at the spirituality and New Age. It's thousands. So right there you have the asymmetry. Go on television, listen to how science is discussed and reported. They always get it wrong. It's frustrating. They always get it wrong. And something that Chomsky observed years ago, he was asked about concision. So he said, why is it that we have to be concise on television? He said, that's a beautiful mechanism, right? Because if you have concision, you can only repeat conventional thoughts. Okay, so you repeat what you've heard. Oh yeah, Iran is terrible. The axis of evil. Okay, we've heard that, so it's fine. Now suppose you say something that's the least bit controversial. You say something people haven't heard before. They're going to say, gee, why are you saying that? What's the evidence? Well, you can't give evidence if you have concision. Okay? You have 5 minutes and that's it. I'll give you a personal example. A couple years ago, I appeared on the O'Reilly Factor. Okay? Bill O'Reilly on Fox News. And he asked me crazy questions like, well, isn't that amazing that more people believe in the virgin birth of Jesus than believe in global warming? Do you think it's, so okay. So I said, I was very nice and smiled and didn't want to engage with him. But at some point I said, look, it saddens me, I said, as a scientist and an educator, that not more people believe in the effectiveness of vaccines or climate change. And then I said, if you ask the people who understand the issues the most, i.e. climate scientists, there's been consensus for a long time. And I cited a number. I said 97 to 98%. Well, there's an actual study published in PNAS, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, one of the most prestigious scientific journals, that has done a very careful study of opinions among climate scientists. I'm happy to send that to any one of you. That's where the number comes from. Okay. Now, he cut me off right away and says, well, I've read a lot about this, and I wouldn't say the number's that high. It's like 60, 75%. Well, even if it was that, who cares? It's still a majority. I wish we'd had time. And I said, okay, Bill, great, what are your sources? What are you citing? I'll tell you what I'm citing, okay? And maybe you can take a look at it. And I'll tell you why that's the place you should look. Okay? And I'll tell you why it's those people that matter and not some guy who appears on national television with fake hair and white teeth to tell you what it's going to rain tomorrow. Meteorologists are great people. They're not climate scientists, so we've talked about this. You have concision, you can't. And that's it, so that's a problem. So that's another thing that, there's a paper I can send you that I once read that made me laugh hysterically, but also made me cry almost. It was called The Unbearable Asymmetry of Bullshit. And it was a scientist saying, look, bullshit is very easy to generate. It's very easy to throw around, okay? Because it doesn't take much thinking, it doesn't take much effort. it's really hard to counter. Because if you are serious and you want to counter every crazy claim, you have to do real thinking and real work. Well, that takes time. Bullshit doesn't. You just throw it around. So there's an asymmetry there. And that's that's a Trump story. Yes.
Solzhenitsyn said, "One fool can ask enough questions to keep 100 wise men busy."
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah, that's exactly.
My clients
also known as the asymmetry of that.
My clients and I have a big breakthrough in an area. People say to me, "How do you life coach?" That's professionally what I am. I know a lot of people. Well, that's their problem. How do you become a life coach? And I actually had to look inside, and I don't know how to become a life coach. And what I've been
Sorry, is that what you do, by the way?
That's what I do.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah, and I've been doing it for over 30 years.
Okay.
And I just tell people, well, I don't teach people anything really. My clients and I, we just have a conversation about life. And the highlight is how we laugh at how full of shit both of us are. That's the highlight of my coaching.
Right.
True. That's true.
I believe you. I believe you. Yes.
The good thing about science is that there can be peculiar, untrue ideas that are accepted, but then they are invalidated. You mentioned facilitated communication. I was working at the time, and
as a speech therapist?
no, clinical psychologist.
Clinical psychologist, okay.
And most of the articles that you brought up, I've read at some time in one of the journals. I mean, I could read a 10-page article every 5 months or so.
Showing us more than that.
Elizabeth Loftus and the others would come up. There are two ones that I remember very clearly and that had real prevalence and did a great deal of harm. And one was by Gregory Bateson, talking about brilliant people, who was one of Martin Luther King's husbands, and, well, sequential husband, I think.
Okay.
And he brought up something about that autism or schizophrenia actually was caused by a mother.
By parenting.
And why it has to be a mother, I don't know. But
Freud.
Yeah,
That's why.
but a mother who said things like, "Come here and go away." And there was actually a family therapist. Now, I never was a family therapist, but I attended some of his lectures. And he was well known, and he, I forget his name, he was from Sweden, and he came over and gave lectures, and really believed this. And people actually, in psychology, really did think that Bruno Bettelheim wrote a whole book called Love Is Not Enough, and for a long while, this was accepted, that it was the mother who was cold to the child. And that has been completely invalidated. And I worked at clinics, but I worked in a mental hospital for a while. And there were really autistic patients, and when the theory changed and became disproved, there were some of the parents who were still alive were called back and told, "We're really sorry, we kept you away from your son," and I remember hearing this. But the point is that things are corrected inside.
There is a...
Yes, but the damage isn't being done now.
But the fact that something's been corrected doesn't mean that it's correct.
Oh, well, this, that something was disproved.
It was disproved, but what replaced that is the medical model view of schizophrenia. And that's being questioned now, and I would argue that it's incorrect, because scientists have looked for a medical explanation for mental illness for many, many years, and they have not been able to identify it. So it may have been misguided to say, and certainly was misguided to say that schizophrenia was caused by mothers, but I think the newest thinking, and it is still controversial, but I think it makes a lot of sense.
So what's the claim now?
The claim is that mental illness is a response to life traumas. And yeah, no, please, you know, you see, now you're a scientist, but you're laughing at what.
No, I'm not laughing because I don't doubt. First of all, if we talk about mental illness broadly, it's too broad a category. We have to start talking about what kind. There's little doubt that in some cases the environment plays a role. If you're a soldier that saw combat and you have PTSD, okay.
That's not the only case.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So blanket statement. I mean, I'm not saying you're.
Right.
So I'd like to see.
Right,
more
and I'm not
specifics.
saying in 100% of the cases, but like read Peter Breggin. I mean, you're a scientist. Peter Breggin would be one of the people who says that. Another one is somebody that I know personally, Dr. Dan Fisher. He has some writings, mostly.
I thought you were going to say Dr. Phil for a second.
No.
Drop the table, she has to move. That was the advice for.
Because
you know how you lose weight, by the way?
What's that?
Do you know how to lose weight, according to Dr. Phil?
Eat
drop them potato chips and move. That's his advice. I think it's very deep. I mean, if you drop the potato chips and move, you lose weight.
Right.
That's evidence-based.
Still confirming the original point that science corrects itself.
Yes, science corrects itself. Yes, it does. There's a correcting mechanism in it because it's not based on dogma and it's based on evidence. And
you're right. Science is based on evidence, but sometimes what
which doesn't mean that there isn't some dogmatic islands of belief in certain fields.
That's right.
And usually the softer the science is, the more you find those kinds of things. In physics, it's much less.
Right.
In medicine, they say 25 years in medical school, and at least one half of what you've learned is wrong. At least one half of what you've learned is wrong in 25 years. And it's not that the people who were teaching 25 years ago were deliberately teaching bullshit. They were teaching what they thought was true at the time. And now you have additional evidence. So that, in the way, I have to agree that science does correct itself. It may be that what the 25 years from now, what's believed will be changed. But there is the motion is toward improvement.
Good point. I'll add something real quick, and then I'll take, I'm told, one more question and a half, and then we have to move out. There's a myth out there, I'm not saying it's here, that, well, it's science, it's all theories anyway, what we know today could be wrong tomorrow. Not so quickly.
Yeah.
Okay? Because science isn't just in the business of, coming up with theories, it's also in the business of finding out what the facts are. So here's the example I like to give. We now think we have a pretty good understanding of how human reproduction works. Okay? It's not birds dropping babies from the sky, and I'm willing to bet all the money I have that in 10, 15, 20, 30, 50 years, we're not going to discover that if you rub a woman's feet, she'll get pregnant. Okay? So that's not going to change. We know how human reproduction works, and I don't think that's going to change. And there are many, many other things that we've learned that are unlikely to change. Okay, I'll take one more question from the gentleman in the back.
Can you give a rough percentage of the world's people that believe in the soul?
Okay, so I know that. So I'll give you country by country. So in the U.S., it's 70 to 80%. In some parts of Africa, it's literally 100%. The place to look is there's a book by a philosopher called Stephen Cave called Immortality. It's very, very beautifully written. Yeah. Right, very good book. And he goes over various narratives that we have told as a species throughout history for immortality. The soul narrative is one of them, resurrection is one of them, there's a number of them, I think there's 4. But he gives numbers in that book. So 100% in some African countries. Down to 20% in Scandinavia, if you look at Norway, Sweden. So there's wide variation.
Small countries.
Yeah, small countries, true, but it's a percentage of the population, so it doesn't matter.
Well, I'm thinking the whole world is just sort of...
Oh yeah, it's an island, yeah. Most of the world is religious. So apart from, say, Western Europe, which... So there's data, for example, Gallup has collected data on this since 1947, a range of countries, and what you find, which is very interesting, is that compared to mid-20th century, as the 20th century unfolded, many, if not most, Western European countries witnessed a phase of secularization in terms of beliefs and everything. The US, if you look, has remained flat and constant. We understand why now. If you want a good book, a really good book, you take a look at a book by historian Kevin Cruz of Princeton called One Nation Under God. The subtitle is How Corporate America Invented Christian America. It's very, very good. Very good. And you guys, many of you are, I'm not going to say old, mature enough to remember the 50s and the 60s and the Eisenhower administration and the addition of In God We Trust on paper bill that you can actually mark something. Yeah, exactly. So that's a really good book, by the way.
That book is sort of parallel to Jane Mayer's book, Dark Money. It shows
Yes.
billionaire money
That's
is
right.
controlling the ground on which we stand. And then this week she has an article in the New Yorker and been interviewed this past week on her new article.
That I haven't seen. Yeah. Okay, so I'm told that we're running out of time. I want to thank you all. You guys have been an amazing audience. So many